Welcome to the Two Echidnae podcast. You're with Mon and Don.
Two advanced practice nurses with decades of experience in hard-to-heal wounds, burrowing into prickly conversations.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. We're doing it. Okay.
So welcome to Two Echidnae's first episode of our podcast.
I know. I was nervous, but I think I'm just starting to warm up into it. So yeah. I'm happy to start talking if you want me to.
I think we need to just roll with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
so who are we and what are we doing here?
Well, you go first. You talk about yourself.
Yeah, very, very briefly, because I think we'll spend another episode or two unpacking who we are. So we've got some content we want to do today. So my name's Donna and I'm a wound consultant nurse and lymphoedema practitioner, and I work in private practice in regional Victoria. And I have worked with yourself previously and very excited about this podcast that we're going to do. So you introduce yourself and then we can talk about our joint venture.
And as you know, I'm your very close colleague, Monika and I work in a CNC role as an advanced practice nurse consultant, consulting across a number of health services in the public health sector. And I've known you for many years. We've been kindred spirits for many years, have had very prickly conversations and thought-provoking conversations about clinical care in the past, and it's led to the evolution of this podcast. So I'm still feeling a bit not natural about it yet, but I'll ease into it. And I suppose we've always had these round the table conversations, or picked up the phone and started chatting, and I think it's I want to cut there, but anyway, keep going. So I suppose the question is, why did we come up with the name Two Echidnae?
What are we doing here with Two Echidnae?
Yeah. I remember many times we were talking about starting a podcast, and it's gonna. We'd met. Can we mention your name, Ben?
You can do whatever. Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to talk about your introduction to Ben first?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that's a really nice segue.
That's a good way to start.
Yeah, and we'll have to be careful not to go down too many rabbit holes, although I should say echidna burrows, because I often say rabbit holes, but we're talking about echidnas. We want to be really Australian here. So that's the first point I'll make about why we're here, echidnas, because it's Australian, and there's certain things about what we've done in the last few years that have led us to have that resonance with what an echidna is and how unique it is. So we'll explain the echidna later. But essentially in private practice, I've been down a journey, as you do, of self-growth, personal growth, which is good for business and good for the person. And I've had the privilege of coming across a number of really fantastic coaches and people who are also going through that process. And one of them has been the amazing Ben Cook, and I want to shout out to his studio here at the moment in Fundamental Studios. So he's definitely been an enabler and one of those great people that we've met along the way and that you've had the privilege of learning from as well. So with regard to, I'm going to echo those sentiments that you've said about many of our conversations over the years. We always say we must put that in a book, we must put that in an episode, we must do that in a podcast. More people have to know about this issue, these clinical issues, these frustrations, these gaps in services, these things that we keep educating a lot. We keep trying to promote wound care and I would say lymphoedema type and chronic edema as well into that. I don't believe you can really separate the two. And yet we just seem to be, hitting our heads against a brick wall often. And one of the things that's come up for us a lot is much of the discussion around wound care and awareness and even in education is very sanitised, very clean. And we feel as though there's a gap in perhaps what exists within Australia even. I'm sure it exists in wider places, but we can speak predominantly from an Australian context. there's things we need to unpack and things we need to say that we feel as though the wound care community and people who even want to learn about wound care, whether they might be newer, somewhere in the middle, or, you know, further down the track like us, you know, we need to get them out in the open. So, you know, it's not just a space for us to debrief and chat like we might be having our usual chats and supporting each other and encouraging each other, but there's bigger issues that aren't being said.
Yeah, I suppose, like we were discussing the other day, we wanted to desanitise the conversation. Too many times, stories and case studies or moments are sanitised in our profession, not, particularly in wound management, yet they're not honest and robust enough. So I don't think clinicians always get the right answers because of that, because people are trying to be either not so much politically correct, but sometimes there's no evidence out there, so people are really nervous about talking about their experiences. They may not feel confident about it, but I think between the two of us, we've got many years of that and of successes and the failures, and that's what we want to talk about. I mean, even this morning I had what I think is a bit of a failure and it made me feel a bit crummy. And we want to make this as real as possible for clinicians, and saying that even people at our level have moments where, you know, self-doubt, and we have to reflect back on what we've done, and that only makes us, I think, better clinicians.
100%.
So having that raw conversations, those desanitised conversations. And even last night we were listening to some podcasts and we're thinking, yeah, that's right, but that's not absolutely right. We understand why you're saying that because of either maybe the people they are, the businesses they run, or the environments they're in. But hopefully this can be, you know, as it progresses, a lot more honest and raw, and we can share that with the listeners.
And that has to be good for wound care. It has to be good for supporting clinicians, and it has to be good for advancing wound care. Because I feel as though as a clinical specialty, whatever you want to call it, it's... I'm going to come out and say one of those prickly things right now. We use this word a little bit. A lot of times we infantilise wound care, or it's dumbed down, and we make it fun. Okay, we have fun. It's important to have fun everywhere, but sometimes there's a little bit too much fun, and we're trying to increase funding and increase awareness, increase equity across all sectors, because there's a lot of inequities at the moment with access to funding both in the wound and lymphoedema space, and even people with diabetes and the new wound consumable scheme that's coming that we still need to find out a lot of information about. There's a lot of inequities.
Well, I suppose now's the time to talk about how we came up with the name Echidna. So we, as I was saying before, that we were always saying how we were saying things that were a bit on the edge, or not so much cutting edge, controversial,
provocative.
Yes, and sometimes, you know, we ourselves, the clinicians, have sat in a forum amongst our peers, and we haven't had the confidence to say something. I'm known for sometimes saying those things that no other person's prepared to say, and that sometimes reaped rewards, and sometimes it's just fallen flat.
Can I just say, I believe a lot of people hear some of the things that you say. I'm a bit less provocative in that public space, but I'm sure it resonates more with people. But it's just they hear it, but it's a hard place to get into.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that I'm right all the time. You know, sometimes I blunder my way through it, but I still think that this is an opportunity to start exploring those avenues and those questions I have, and those, you know, clinical conundrums that we face on a daily basis. So going back to the Echidna name, you know, we were having these conversations, and then I read something you'd sent me, and it was something that I was listening to about one thing that advanced clinicians need to do is have a really thick skin.
Yes.
And
when you're saying those provocative, those provocative
statements or those ideas, and
grow a thick skin. And the reference was to a rhinoceros.
Yes.
Have a rhinoceros hide.
Yeah, a thick hide.
And that resonated with both of us. And so as we then progressed to this podcast.
Yeah, and I was just thinking one day, we're going to have this podcast. What are we going to call it? And I was thinking, well, what's something Australian? And then immediately came to mind Echidna. And then I give you a ring. Hey, Donna, what do you think about Echidna? And you said, that's my favourite animal. And that's where we ended up. So,
You know, an echidna is something I always find that when you see one, you know that it's a bit rare and it's very special, and you always stop and look at it. It's a bit like stopping and looking at the koalas now because you don't see as many of them around. But echidnas are absolutely fascinating. So we've done a little bit of, for our inaugural episode here, we've done a little bit of learning. We're always learning on all kinds of things, still in wound care and lymphoedema and all of those areas. But we really enjoyed unpacking some of the attributes of the echidna, and we were fascinated to find there's a lot of parallels between, not just the fact that we like the echidna, but between what we're trying to bring to this podcast in filling those gaps and having those prickly conversations that are quite endearing to the echidna. We wanted to make that association. So,
yeah. So I think the one thing, I don't know whether you want to do this in order of what we've written down,
not
or
necessarily,
or more, because I think the thing that first struck me was when you found out how the echidna uses its 4 paws.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was incredible.
So
Wasn't
you
it?
talk to that.
So when it burrows, it uses its 4 claws. So it's not just using 2, it's using 4. And it made me think of wound clinicians who are pulling in everything that's available to them. Because often we get, and I'm talking to this space when I'm dealing with a lot of clinicians who are just learning about wound care, so not so much advanced people who are already there, but they're very dressing focused, they're very task focused, and we would come along and do an advanced consultation and go back to basics, but we are bringing in a lot of aspects that they hadn't even thought about. So we're doing much more of a holistic assessment. We're bringing in other tools, like might be bringing in your allied clinicians, and thinking outside the box, those type of things, but bringing in and using everything that's available to us. And I think a lot of wound clinicians and predominantly nurses, particularly in community spaces, are good at that, thinking outside the box, using things that are available to them.
Yeah.
That might not always be perhaps textbook.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think we do a lot of burrowing. We're just the detectives. And again, we use all the skills available to us. I mean, just recently I was involved in a presentation where I put up a photo of a wound in front of a really graphic wound of someone in the community, and that was a picture of that was exposed to decision makers in health. And one person came up to me and said, a key decision maker, a CEO in fact, and said, I just had no idea that that's what you do. I didn't know that that was a wound. And so I don't know where I was going with that, but essentially people think that we just slap a dressing on, as we always have said before. But in fact, it became very evident, I think, in that presentation, all the burrowing that I did to get to that stage. So yeah, that was that really resonated with me, that using four claws to dig.
It was fascinating. Yeah. I found that.
And often you dig to see where there are gaps, I suppose, where things have been missed. I don't know how you can draw the analogy with the burrow there. Maybe that's where
there's a few different ways.
Maybe the answer there. I don't know.
Yeah. We've spoken about the spines before being prickly, and that's very, very protective. I also resonated very much with the way that echidnas burrow and use their snout, but they're detail oriented. Yes. They're going for all those ants and all those little creatures that they eat, and they're often doing their work in the dark. Yeah. And in the dirt and in the mud. And I think we have to get down and dirty sometimes. We're not necessarily hiding, but that's where the detail is. I love nothing more than getting down and showing someone how to clean a foot really well. And I've had people come along and say, no, you don't have to clean their foot or their leg. Let me do that for you. And I'm like, no, don't take that privilege away from me, but it's I actually want to show you how to do it properly. That's the conversation that's going on in the back of my head. But I love getting down there and getting dirty, and I just love the way the echidnas are down there in the burrows, furrowing away, working really hard, because we often do a lot of our work that's unseen. I might have half an hour with a patient or a client, but I can be spending 2 really important other hours chasing everything else up and going for the details.
Yeah. And also, again, going back to my earlier point about where I'd mucked up, or not mucked up, but I had to reflect on a decision made or a discussion had. And when I ran the name Echidna past someone I know and said, thinking of the name of Echidna, and they immediately said, oh, don't they hide and, roll up in a ball? And I probably did that even, not so much this morning, but last night. But I curled up in a ball, was waiting for not so much the attack, but just some comments to come through. And I rolled up in a ball, thought about it, and I've already starting to unfurl myself today, ready to do. I've already made that phone call. I've already started digging. I had reflected on it, curled up in a ball, reflected on it, and thought, right, where are we going to take this now? And so that's what wound care is. That's what wound management is. That's what's working at an advanced practice level, and thinking about the teams that I'm supporting. And the conversations that need to be had. So off I go.
Correct.
With my 4 paws with I don't know how many claws an echidna has.
That's something we have to look at. They have a few. They're very similar to the platypus too, but that's going down another.
Okay.
No, that absolutely resonated with me. I think we have to know as wound clinicians when we've got to take stock and just burrow down and perhaps look after the team. We've spoken about that a lot too. We have sometimes the best way for us to help the client, and we'll use all those terms interchangeably throughout these episodes: client, patient, consumer, resident, etc. When our best work will be supporting the team that is supporting them. It might not necessarily be us face to face with that client, but to know when to take stock and to when to be that encourager or that coach, and to not necessarily put in interventions that we might very much think are needed, but it's not the right timing. So I think timing is so important. Some things can wait. You can put a pin in them because there's other things more important. It might just be, for example, the hygiene. It might be like, let's just actually not focus too much on that dressing, or even debriding that wound. This is going to be a bit controversial because for me, often there's other things going on. Like I might have really inconsistent care. I might have a lot of other clinicians, everyone well-meaning, of course, all saying, no, you must do this, you must do that. And there could be 5 different plans going around. The poor consumer's really, really confused and frustrated, as is everyone else, and no one's talking to each other. And you've got to sort all that out before you can move forward. So sometimes we need to burrow down, take stock and reflect. I'm exactly the same. I don't make all the best decisions all the time, but that's what makes a really good clinician, to reflect. And you learn from that and you move forward, and then you get back to using all your 4 claws and you get burrowing and furrowing away.
Yeah, well, I remember last night we were hearing about, we learned that they survive wildfires.
Yeah.
So they burrow down. And sometimes it's not about what dressing you put on the wound. It's trying to figure out, okay, you've got carers coming into the home. Are all the carers registered? Does everyone know that all those carers are registered? Or are there some unregistered workers in there? And so you may be doing all the education and trying to get all the team together and having all those important conversations with with the team, but there may be one person who just happens to be unregistered, or a family member that's providing some unofficial care, and they don't have access to your education. So they may be that missing link. So then you've got to burrow, dig until you finally found that it's not the dressing that you're putting on the wound, but it so happens it might be the cousin of someone who's just doing some informal care, coming in to perform that care, and they're not getting the message, and so you don't have consistency of care.
Yeah, 100% all the time.
So it's just burrow. So I suppose, look, we've got a big list, but I think we're
getting there. Can I add one more?
I think you can.
I think I can, because it's our podcast, right?
Yes.
And maybe this is a nice way to wrap up in talking about the Echidna and those associations between wound clinicians. We learnt in our research of echidnas that they are in most environments.
Yes.
And they're not necessarily territorial, and they overlap. Some of them have very small areas of the sphere that they work in, others larger. And we felt that that was similar to wound consultants as well, because generally there'll be, one available to an area and there could be some overlapping, but they're in most habitats in one way or another.
They are.
I'm sure in Australia, there's going to be people who say, look, yeah, there's no one here, we don't have access to anyone, I get that. But there are a lot more remote services out there now, telehealth availability compared to 5 or 10 years ago when they probably weren't there, or ways to reach out to people. But certainly in the majority of urban and regional areas, there's a wound consultant or someone who does that type of role. And we all look a bit different too, because we found there were different types of echidnas. There's a couple of different types that we were learning about as well.
And some are rare and some are more common.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that I think we're distributed across the landmass now, and I mean, albeit in small numbers in some areas, but also within a health service, you have wound consultants who may work in one part of the organisation, for example, in community health and aged care, others who work across all those program areas. But I think sometimes, and I'd really like, I'd be really interested to see what the listeners think, I sometimes wonder whether wound clinicians really get into those environments such as mental health areas and mental health wards, and not so much ward, but I don't know. Well, can we cut that out?
Units.
Units, yeah. Yeah, but so so I'll just repeat that again. I sometimes wonder about whether we have access to some really other important areas, such as mental health, where there can be some traumatic injuries that occur in those environments. And I really don't always think that wound consultants, have access or are even thought of in those environments. But that's something to think about. So that's they can be rare in that respect as well, as rare as having anyway. That will cover.
I agree. There's lots of areas where we need to do, a lot more work. Wounds are everywhere. Yeah. I don't know where there's no wounds, really.
Yeah, but I don't think wound consultants are always considered in those environments. And that's just something to ponder in the future, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed.
What else? I mean, I think that's, echidnas are solitary animals. Can we just talk about that?
Oh, definitely.
I raised it. I actually raised that topic, but you spoke to it last night. Can you remember what you said?
I'm going to need your help.
Well,
we often work in isolation, I think, was where I was going.
Yes.
And it can be also an isolating specialty area, because often the work that we do is in isolation. We still might be part of a bigger team. We might have some networking and debriefing with other people within our service or sphere, but the actual work we do is often isolating. And I have found a lot of clinicians I've worked with, some keep very isolated. That's not been my experience, or I've found that's very limiting. But a lot of people do work in a lot of relative isolation.
And also we're solitary in that there's usually one, in the major organisations, the metros, there are a series of, or a team of wound consultants, and generally led by a nurse practitioner. But often, particularly in regional environments, if you're lucky, you have one wound consultant, and that wound consultant's often working with, unless you're in the small rurals, but usually working with a team of podiatrists, a team of physios, a team of OTs, and there's usually that one wound consultant, or that one FTE is split across a number of people, but it's still one person generally. You don't often see teams of wound consultants. Yeah. You see teams of physios, teams of OTs, and I think there's a real need for that.
There is. There's a lot of work for us.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
there you go.
The two Echidnae, because we realised the plural for echidna and echidna, a plural for echidna is echidna and echidnae.
Yes.
And we couldn't get I better not say.
We couldn't get a handle with the echidna. So that's a very good, it's been used. So, but the echidnae resonated with us. So we've got heaps to talk about. We're going to bring in lots of different topics. We're still ultimately going to keep it a conversation between two clinicians, so it's very much going to be a very natural and organic process for it. We've got lots of clinical things we want to talk about. We've got lots of systemic things we want to talk about.
Yeah.
And it'll be I imagine, a very broad range of things that we'll bring in that's going to be filtered with a lot of clinical experience.
And hope to engage people in that conversation, to feel confident, to have some of those. It's not asking the dumb questions, it's asking the controversial questions. You know, can I do this with that? Or I've been doing this for so long, the evidence is telling me such. What are your thoughts? Like they can be, we're never, not, Or...
Do you find that differences, I'm going to go off on a dog leg here, do you find that differences even between people who are working at our level? Like we were having a conversation yesterday, we were doing some planning about a particular dressing, I won't mention the name, and you said, what is that?
Yeah.
And it's something that I don't use, but it's in my area a lot, and it's not one I'm particularly fond of because I don't think it's used well. But you weren't familiar with it at all. And we've worked really closely, and we work in not dissimilar environments a lot, certainly in regional Victoria. So there's so much to be shared by just
And I mean, and also I suppose we're prickly, but we're also myth busting. The other day I was told that a particular skin cleanser wasn't TGA approved. Well, it had been, but I didn't realise that the skin cleansers are deemed a cosmetic. I didn't know that. And so there are different processes involved to get that onto the hospital formularies. I won't go into too much detail. So even that. So anyway,
we will learn a lot. We will learn a lot from each other as well. So it's all good. I think we will probably sign off there for our first episode.
And
thank you for listening to Two Echidnae, and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, and thank you, Donna. I really enjoyed it. Ready for the next one.
Stay tuned for episode 2. We'll get into some more prickly conversations.
Yes, more prickly. Yep.
We are so grateful to have this opportunity to share our learnings and challenges with you today. Hopefully it has inspired you to be more curious in your clinical practice and burrow down to issues that bug you. If you liked today's episode, follow and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube and TikTok at Two Echidnae.
If we were too prickly, we'd also like to know. All our contact details and links we've mentioned are in the show notes below. You can also help us by leaving a review and sharing this with your colleagues. We will see you in the next episode, and in the meantime, go forth, be curious, and burrow into some ant nests.
There'll be struggles, there'll be